When Queen Elizabeth II took the throne, her first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill, born in 1874. Last week, she swore in her 15th Prime Minister, Liz Truss, born 101 years after Winston Churchill in 1975. 88% of UK citizens had not known another ruler till last week. As someone from Indian origin, I can't say I fully respect the Queen. The British were responsible for looting the equivalent of $45 trillion when adjusted for inflation, and directly led to the death of over 60 million Indians by starvation alone. The effects of 200 years of plundering are evident even almost a century after independence. Yet, these are things the Queen refused to apologize for in her reign of 70 years, or even attempt to return her cultural heritage locked in the museums. Yet, even I have to admit that the Queen has been a significant part of Western culture for the second half of the 20th century and will continue to be a part of the culture for the first half of the 21st century at least. So, putting aside my gripes with the British Empire of the past, I have to empathize with a saddened nation, one that lost its long-reigning monarch. The Queen's role was a unique one in modern society. She reigned but she didn't rule. She couldn't vote, appear as a witness in court, or change her faith. Despite her lack of tangible power, she still influenced her people by example, living out the principles of unity, service, and dignity. Here's an account of the most significant moments of the life of Queen Elizabeth II. Hundreds of thousands of spectators thronged together in the wind, rain, and cold one morning in 1953. They stood cheek to cheek to see a once-in-a-lifetime event, the coronation procession of Queen Elizabeth II. Winston Churchill was a major presence during Elizabeth's coronation preparations. He had met Elizabeth when she was only 2 years old, declaring that he sensed from her an air of authority and reflectiveness that is rare in an infant. Elizabeth carried with her that air of authority throughout her reign, which began on that windy day in 1953. She was taken to Westminster in the Golden State Coach, wearing her great-great-grandmother's white coronation gown. The maids of honor fitted her with the monarch's crimson velvet robe of state. After a long traditional process, Elizabeth was presented with her regalia, which included gold bracelets, a coronation ring, jeweled scepters, and an orb topped by precious jewels. The Archbishop blessed the solid gold crown, held it aloft, and placed it on her head. Cannons exploded in the Hyde Park and the Tower of London, while shouts of "God save the Queen" rang out from the Abbey. Elizabeth II had officially become the new monarch of the United Kingdom. The Queen's role is simultaneously one of change and constancy. She remains on the throne regardless of who leads Parliament, and so she's had to develop relations with all of the Prime Ministers who have held office since her reign began. The first of them was Winston Churchill. After the Queen's coronation, the two shared their experiences during World War II and met every week for the Tuesday evening meetings. After and including Churchill, Elizabeth's Prime Ministers were a string of Conservatives: Anthony Eden, Harold Macmillan, and Alec Douglas Home. Labour, the UK's left-wing party, didn't win the premiership until Harold Wilson in 1964. Despite Wilson's apparent mismatch with the institution of the monarchy, the two still became close. While Churchill was something of a father figure to Elizabeth, her relationship with Wilson was more of a friendship. He found, to his surprise, that he could relax around her, and that she was genuinely interested in hearing what he had to say. Years later, in 1978-79, the UK experienced what became known as the Winter of Discontent. The Prime Minister James Callaghan struggled to revive the British economy, temperatures plunged to some of the coldest on record, and a high volume of strikes crippled the country. Even the grave diggers went on strike. It was therefore no surprise that in the 1979 general election, the Conservative Party won easily, making Margaret Thatcher the new Prime Minister. Thatcher and Elizabeth had quite a bit in common. First of all, they were born within 6 months of each other, which made it easier to relate. Plus, they were both mothers and at the same time professional hard-working women who had found ways to thrive in male-dominated spheres. However, Thatcher lacked the Queen's sense of humor, and she tended to dominate conversations and lecture at people. Both women were reluctant to discuss their feelings, which meant they could never form a deeper, more personal bond. At that time, the white minority government in the British colony of Rhodesia was under threat from the majority black guerrilla forces led by Marxist Robert Mugabe. The Queen always sided with the Commonwealth, even though she could not say so directly. She visited several of the countries in the Commonwealth, including Tanzania, Malawi, Botswana, and Zambia, before making her way to the conference in Rhodesia. Behind the scenes, she continued speaking to the African leaders in her bungalow. She conveyed sympathy for them and portrayed genuine knowledge of their problems. This impressed the leaders and it made them feel as if she truly cared. In doing so, the Queen brought down the temperature of the situation and enabled Thatcher to better facilitate the Lusaka Accord. During World War II, jobs such as those of chefs, mechanics, medics, and drivers used up some of the men who were capable of fighting on the front lines. So, many women took up these jobs to free up the men. Queen Elizabeth set an example for all women by serving in the Second World War as a mechanic and an army driver. To this date, she remains the only female member of the royal family to serve in the military. Her experience as a driver allowed her to pull off another badass stunt. In 2003, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia visited her in Scotland. Saudi Arabia is known for its policing of women's rights. Most notably, women aren't allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. So when the Saudi prince decided to go for a ride around the castle, the queen decided to become his driver. By the end of the afternoon, the prince was left quivering in the Land Rover. In June of 1981, the queen was sitting atop her black mare, Burmese, enjoying her birthday parade. For the moment though, things were calm. But just before 11 am, as the queen turned towards the parade ground, 6 gunshots rang from within the crowd. The horse was startled, but the queen remained calm and settled it down as the guards tackled the gun. The shots fortunately had been blanks. Just a year later, the queen once again showed her calm in the face of danger. At 7:15 am, she heard the slam of a door. When she sat up in her bed, she was faced with the sight of a barefoot man wearing t-shirt and jeans and holding a shard of glass in his hands. Blood dripped from his thumb as he walked towards the foot of her bed. "Get out of here at once," the queen shouted. But the intruder, Michael Fagan, who had snuck into the palace for the second time, began venting to the queen about his personal problems. To keep him calm, the queen listened patiently and commented sympathetically. Despite the shock of the situation, she remained unusually calm. Finally, a police contingent arrived to take the man away. The queen later described the event as surreal rather than scary. As always, she'd been calm amidst the storm. In late 1991, the tabloids were already ablaze with the failing marriages in the royal family and the lavish spending of public funds. The worst, however, was still to come. June 1992 would mark the queen's 40th year on the throne. Normally, the month would be marked by celebrations for that significant milestone. But before any of that could happen, the Sunday Times published its first excerpt from the book written by Andrew Morton titled Diana, Her True Story. It went into gory details about Diana's emotional problems, portrayed Charles as unfaithful and uncaring, and painted a remote, almost alien picture of the royal family. In August, Duchess Sarah was photographed inappropriately with her financial advisor, John Bryan. The display was humiliating for the whole royal family. Everything came to a crescendo on Friday, November 20th, the 45th wedding anniversary of Queen and Philip, when a part of Windsor Castle caught fire. The fire damaged hundreds of rooms. To the Queen, the fire symbolized a divine punishment for her family's behaviors. The cost of the repairs was estimated to be between 20 and 40 million pounds. A few days after the fire, the Queen appeared at a luncheon, honoring her 40 years on the throne. Her voice was raspy from smoke inhalation, and she was suffering from a severe cold and fever. In her speech, she admitted that 1992 was, and I quote, "not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure." She continued, "In the words of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an Annus Horribilis." In the February of 2022, Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her Platinum Jubilee, the 70th anniversary of her accession to the throne. She was the first British monarch to have reigned for this long, having surpassed Queen Victoria's record in September 2015. After her passing, her son Prince Charles has taken the throne, and after him, her grandson Prince William will succeed. Even as she aged into her 90s, the Queen remained high in spirit and mental fortitude, continuing to host engagements, attend meetings, and carry out her royal duties, though her children also took on increasing responsibility. She passed away aged 96 on 8 September 2022. It was the end of an era. Throughout her long life, while she didn't escape the drama that swirls around her family, the Queen, in true British fashion, always managed to keep a stiff upper lip and do her duty right until the end.